Hello, my crafty friends. Well, last week I had so much fun playing with the layering circles technique that this week I decided to do it again. Only this time we're going to use some different shapes. Hi, it's Lynn Dunn from Stamptastic Designs. Thanks so much for joining me today. In this episode of Stamptastic TV, I have 3 different ways that you can use the layering squares technique in your card making. Now, the cards in this video feature the Gnome for the Holiday stamp set from Stampin Up. Now, I am also using some of the stitched shapes dies, of course the squares in that die set, to create today's cards. But keep in mind that you can use any square shapes that you have on hand as long as they differ in size so that you can layer them together to create these cards. Okay, so let's talk about this first card idea that I have to share with you. So it's very similar to the layering circle technique that I shared last time. The only difference is that we're going to be using different shapes. We're using square shapes to create the design on this card. So to create this card, I am using the 3 largest shapes that are in the Stitched Shapes dies set. So there's a total of 4 dies. There's this little tiny one that goes in the center here. But we're just going to be using the first 3 to create this card. So before we get started creating the card, I just want to go over a couple of things with you, and I mentioned this regarding the circle design as well. So what you will notice is that I have 3 different shapes here. The largest and the smallest square shapes are cut from 2 different colors of cardstock. And then the middle shape is cut from the same color cardstock. So if you cut out 6 squares, you can actually make 2 cards using these 6 squares because we're actually going to be cutting these squares directly in half. So in order to use this technique, you must cut the large and the small square in 2 different colors. Okay, so the first thing you need is a piece of cardstock for the base of your card. So my cardstock piece is 5.5 by 8.5 inches, and I've scored it in the center at 4.25 inches to create the base of my card. Next, I cut a 5.25 by 4 inch piece of white cardstock, and I'm just going to adhere that to my card front. And I have already cut all of my pieces in half, so I only need half of each of the large pieces. So I only need a half of the light green and a half of the dark green. And same thing for the small pieces. I have a half of the small light green and a half of the dark green. And then my middle piece, which was that red piece, I'm using both halves to create this card. So those are the pieces that you need. So this means if you cut out 6 square shapes like I shared, then you have extra pieces of the dark green, you have extra pieces of the light green, you have the other halves, and then you'll have an extra full square of the red that you can use to create a second card. Okay, so let's start with the top piece. So I'm starting with the largest green half square. And then I'm going to layer on my red one. So I'm just going to add some glue on the back here. So I want to layer it in such a way that the edges on the right side of the squares are lined up. So I have more space over here on the left side. So I'm just going to layer that one right on top. And then I'm going to take the smaller light green one. And I'm going to layer this on top of the red. And again, I'm going to line up those right sides here. And of course, line it up on the bottom. All right, so there's our top piece. Now for the bottom piece, I'm going to use the other large green square. So this is the light green. And I'm going to do the same type of layering. So I'm going to take my red square, the half square. And this time, instead of layering it on the right side, I'm going to layer it on the left. So again, I'm just lining up the left side of the squares and of course this top section here. And then I'm going to take this dark green one, the small dark green one, and line them up. Okay, so what you will notice is that by putting this together in this fashion, we kind of get this little zigzag look here. So what you see is that the red here matches up, and this light green matches up kind of in a pattern, and then the dark green matches up. So you can accomplish this look because we have that large dark green And then we have a small dark green that are kind of matching up together. That's why it's important to make sure that you cut a large and a small with the dark green and a large and a small with the light green. And then you'll get this fun little pattern. Okay, so we can go ahead and adhere this to our card, and then we'll adhere that bottom section. And when we adhere this section, we want to make sure that we line up those colors together. Okay, the next thing I did is I just cut a 1/2 inch wide by 4.5 inch piece of designer paper. And I'm just going to put this right over this section here, just to kind of cover up that seam. It just gives it a really nice look. Then I'm just going to open up my card here, and I'm going to stamp a greeting right up here in this little area. So I'm just using real red ink. It just coordinates with the colors I'm using in my card. And then for the finishing touch, I'm just going to embellish the card with one of those adorable little gnomes from the Gnome for the Holidays stamp set. And then the last thing, I'm just going to add a couple rhinestones just to this piece of designer paper to embellish it. And there you go. Isn't that adorable? Okay, this next card design actually uses the squares in a little bit different way. So instead of cutting the square shapes straight down in half, I actually cut them diagonally in half and created little triangular shapes. So let me show you how to make this card. So the concept for creating this card is exactly the same as what I just shared, but there's a couple differences. So first, I used some smaller square shapes. So if I bring back the stitched shapes dies, I used the 3 smaller dies and I did not use this large one. So because I'm cutting my squares diagonally, I decided to go with some smaller squares to ensure that they fit on the card appropriately. But again, you can see the largest square and the smallest squares are both cut in the dark green and the light green. And again, the middle squares are cut in red. And by cutting 6 square shapes, you can make 2 cards. Okay, so before we get started making the card, I just thought I would lay out the pieces so that you could see them. So you can see I have a large dark green and a small dark green, a large light green and small, and then I have 2 of the same size of the red. So what I basically did with all of these pieces, all of the squares that I just showed you earlier, so I just cut them in half diagonally to create these little triangular shapes. So this is how we're going to create this particular design. Okay, so I'm starting with the same base that I did with the previous card, same 5 1/4 by 4 inch piece of white cardstock adhered to my card front. And then we'll start on the top. So we'll just kind of follow the pattern that's over here on this side. So we'll start with our large dark green triangular shape. Then we will go ahead and adhere the next largest shape, which is our red triangular shape. And we're going to adhere it towards the right side here again. And then we'll use our small shape, the light green triangular shape, and we'll adhere that. So you line them all up on the right side and line them all up with the bottom. Okay, now we'll start with the bottom. So we'll start with the light green. So that's the largest triangular shape. And of course, now we'll add our red one. And we're going to line it up this time on the left-hand side. And then our last shape is the dark green, the small dark green triangular shape. And we're again going to add this one and line it up on that left-hand side. Okay, so now we have another fun little design. And again, you can see how the patterns line up. And you will be adhering them so they offset each other like this. So you have that fun little pattern where these pieces match up. And then I again cut a 1/2 inch wide by 4.5 inch piece of designer paper. So I'm just adhering that right over the center here. Okay, and then I'm going to open up my card and add my greeting up on the top here. Again, I'm using that real red ink to add my greeting. And then for the finishing touch, I'm just going to add my little gnome. Now, I did a little bit of coloring on the gnome using some of the Stampin' Blends. You can use whatever coloring tools you have on hand to do your coloring. And that's it. How adorable is this card? I think this is one of my favorite designs. Super fun. Okay, and this last card idea is just kind of a fun and different kind of card idea for you. It involves layering some square shapes, but not on top of each other. So we're gonna create this fun little design on our card simply by layering some 1-inch square shapes around our designer series paper. It kind of creates just a fun little look. So let me show you how to make this card. Okay, so to create this kind of layered look on the card front, what you're going to need are 2 pieces of designer paper that are 1 by 1 inch and 2 pieces of white paper that are also 1 by 1 inch. So we'll start with the white paper. You're going to leave this square as it is, and the other 1 by 1 inch piece you're going to cut in half diagonally so that you create 2 little triangular pieces. And then you're going to do the same thing with the designer paper. So I have my full square here, and then I have the other square I cut into 2 triangular pieces. So once you've completed this prep, then we're ready to put together the card. Okay, so we're going to start with a piece of Mossy Meadow cardstock for the base of our card. And then we're going to use a 5 1/4 by 4 inch piece of white cardstock, and we'll put that right on our card front. Next, you're going to cut a 2 by 5 1/4 inch piece of designer paper, and it can be any designer paper. I recommend kind of using a smaller pattern, but you can use any paper. And you're going to adhere that to the left side of your card front. And now we're going to take those little pieces and we're going to create a fun little design up on the top here. So we'll start with our full pieces of white cardstock and our full piece of designer paper. So we're going to be adhering them opposite each other on this card. So all the white pieces will lay on top of this designer paper, and all of the designer paper pieces will lay on top of this side, the white side of the paper. All right, so then we will take the other pieces. So I like to lay them all out first to make sure I have enough room here. So I'm gonna scoot these down a little bit. So we'll lay this white triangular shape right here, and we're gonna lay it right up against the edge of the designer paper. Then you're gonna take a designer paper triangular piece and you're gonna match it up with that white one. Then you'll take the other white triangular piece. That one's going to go underneath here. And then the pattern paper piece will go right next to it. So you can kind of play around with these to line them up straighter than what I have them. And once you have them aligned, then you can go ahead and adhere all the pieces. Okay. So as you can see, it just kind of gives the illusion that the white paper is showing through this piece of designer paper and that the designer paper is showing through the white paper. It just kind of gives you that illusion. So it's just a fun and simple design, and it's a great way to use your pattern paper. All right, so let's finish the card. So I'm going to add a little gnome down on the bottom here. So I'm just stamping this in black ink. And then I'm going to go ahead and just color it in with some of my stamping blends. So I'm just using some real red, old olive, and then I'm using some ivory. Now you could certainly leave this the way it is or add any kind of little embellishment up here. I'm just going to add some little holly leaves, but you can use any embellishment on the top there. It doesn't have to be holly. Cute little ornament or something like that would be fun too. And then I just cut out the little sentiment. I cut out the little words for the sentiment, and I'm just going to adhere them individually on the bottom of the card here. So how adorable is this one? I know I've told you every single card is adorable, but it is. The cards are absolutely adorable. So fun little techniques. I hope you enjoyed them. Okay, so there you go. Now you have 3 different ways that you can use the layering squares technique in your card making. And if you enjoyed these card ideas, feel free to download the printable tutorial. You can find the link in the description below this video. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know by liking it and sharing it with your friends. And leave me a comment below to let me know what you enjoyed most about the video and the cards shared here today. Have a fun and creative day, my friends. Take care.